Welcome to Rejected Religion Patreon, Tier 2, The Groves of Orpheus. My guest this month is Veronica French. Welcome, Veronica.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you for this opportunity. Very excited to be here today.
Well, it's a pleasure to speak with you this evening. I'm happy you're here. You have recently completed your master's thesis in religious studies from the University of Erfurt in Germany. Congratulations to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are specializing in the study of modern shamanism, anthropology of religion, and gender studies. And now I just realized that I don't have the title of your thesis. What is the title of it?
It was Modern Shamanism in Germany, like a comparative study, something along those lines. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact. I will get it for you.
So Modern Shamanism in Germany, a comparative study. Okay, so I guess the first question that I would have for you would be a personal one.
Oh, okay.
And that would be if you could talk a little bit about your background and what motivated you to choose this particular area of research.
Interestingly, I was exposed pretty early in my childhood to alternative ideas and alternative ways of thinking. And there was both. I had a grandmother that was very strict, religious Christian, and that had its own influence. And then I had New Age parents. So there was astrology and palm reading and aliens and just this awareness of various topics. And I think from that, having there be like two different things I was being exposed to, it gave me an opportunity to kind of look at stuff myself and figure out like what worked for me. So that was part of it. And then I did actually have some physical issues in my history. So even childhood illnesses and anxiety, and this turned pretty young to an autoimmune condition. So I was in bed for a year, and Western medicine wasn't really working for me at that time. And so I began exploring just everything alternative to try to help myself. So this led to working with various practitioners. I mean, I was a bit desperate, so I was willing to try just about anything at that time. And so in that, I was exposed to shamanism. I was exposed to alternative forms of healing. And in that time, I was also doing my bachelor's, and I had started out in psychology, but I switched to this pretty alternative liberal college in Arizona. And I went for what they called holistic health. So they actually had a holistic health degree, and I focused on shamanism and Chinese medicine. And so it was more of like an anthropological medicinal approach. I was looking at kind of that autoethnography or that insider-outsider, and how especially women were being affected by the Western medicine model, and especially around these types of conditions that I was experiencing. So from my personal experience, I started looking at these various alternative methods. And I worked with a gentleman who referred to himself as a medicine man, and he actually was from an indigenous tribe up near Niagara Falls. And I worked with him for several years. And then I actually took courses at my college in shamanism, which was interesting. So with a woman who called herself a shaman at that time, and then Chinese medicine. So that was like my focus, and the like from the fifth element and how they looked at the whole body instead of just like the symptoms and stuff. So that was my bachelor's. And from my healing journey, I then from there became a practitioner myself. So I became a massage therapist and an energy body practitioner. And when I moved to California with my husband, I had my own business. So I had a business for 5 years doing that. So that is like that side of it. And then when we moved to Europe and various life situations, I decided to go back to school for my master's. And choosing religious studies was hugely influenced by my husband, who is in religious studies also and in esotericism. And so even though I watched his process of getting a PhD, for some reason, I was crazy enough to jump on that bandwagon also. And there was just an opportunity and a good program and someone that I really connected with as far as who was running the program that said you can study shamanism from an academic standpoint. And so that is how I got on the path. And I had just been exposed also during that time to the people who are considered like the forerunners of modern shamanism becoming globalized, which I didn't really know about Mircea Eliade, but I read Carlos Castaneda. He's a big name. And I read Michael Harner, who's another big name. I mean, that was a book that was given to me in my shaman class. One of my shaman classes was his book to read. So, I had exposure to that. And so I took what I knew from there and went into the master's program.
Right. So looking at it from the academic viewpoint, then trying to make I guess that would be more, I guess you could term that a holistic viewpoint, because you're not only looking at it from a practitioner standpoint and as, in your own personal experience, but now you're looking at it from other perspectives as well. So that's making it a very all-encompassing view of what it is that you're trying to learn more about. I guess before we get into more detail about your thesis itself, it might be a good idea to discuss these terms, shamanism.
Absolutely.
Because it's kind of a difficult term. It's kind of sticky.
It is.
As well as in your thesis, you talk also about animism. So maybe if we could talk about these two terms.
Great.
First, about like definitions and why shamanism is kind of sticky, as I said. And then we can move on to talk about how you're using these in your research. But let's talk about shamanism first.
Absolutely. That could be the whole interview, right? So, I mean, there's as much debate about that term and the study of it as there is of the study of religion. And I guess that you just find that in any area that you go and you research, that people have different opinions about it. And the term shaman is a Tungus, which is a tribe from in the Siberian area. That's where that term originally came from. And through various people coming in contact in that area, travelers and missionaries and everything, that term started to be used for anybody that was doing these types of practices that people from the 1700s, 1800s, they were coming in contact with it and writing about it and like, what is this? And so that term started being used for anybody that was utilizing these different types of practices. Then it became global, really, with Mircea Eliade, from my understanding. Like, he really put that term on the map and globalized it, and came from a perspective that this was like the oldest religion and it exists everywhere. And of course, there's been lots of critiques about him as well. So there's that. So the way that I approached it and to define it is there's the shamanism, but there's other terms that have been used even for those practitioners. And some of the older terms were like indigenous or native or traditional and even, quote unquote, primitive, which of course we have a tremendous amount of critique about those types of words and what that means. And it's moved through the research of it to shaman or shamanism. Some people have said like medicine man or Native American was a term in the old time, and that's moved to indigenous or First Nation. I mean, there's been just a tremendous amount of traveling with this term. And there is like 4 different ways that it could even be studied in academia and like the anthropology of religion. And 2 of them that I'll just point out. One is the Arctic complex, the Siberian Arctic complex. And that's really kind of the purists that say this term should only be used for people in this area where the term originally came from. And then you have people like Eliade and others that have come after that say, but these practices have similarities. And if you look at them in a certain way, you can see that it like can be attributed to many different cultures, not just that. So this is like one of the big debates in study. Like, should the word shaman even be used or shamanism be used? And should each locale have what was their original term for practitioners or people doing these types of. So the way that I approached it was because there's been so much connotation, negative and positive, my focus was really, what are the practitioners that I'm interviewing themselves calling themselves? And that is more important to the study that I was choosing to do. But in my thesis, I said, I'm going to say traditional shamanism for anything that was historical, and I'm going to say modern shaman or shamanism for talking about what's happening currently. And when I referred to the practitioners themselves, I said modern shamanic practitioner. Right. So that was what I like.
Okay.
And I said why? Because there's both positive and negative around these terms. And I based that also on what the interviewees were saying to me. So those are the terms that I used. And I held on to the shaman term because it has not just in academia, but in pop culture, there's so much associated with that name. And when you say shaman, most people kind of have an idea of what you're talking about. Yeah. So that was why I chose to stick with that. But I did, differentiate between historical practices versus modern practices. And I only had 5 interviewees, and I have 3 different terms from them of what they were calling themselves. So even within 5 people,
it's already varied. Yeah,
it was already varied. So then, what became my focus is how are they defining it? So I decided that it wasn't my job to say what is a shaman, what is not a shaman, what's the correct term. I'm more interested in how they're identifying themselves. What is their experience? What are they calling themselves?
Yeah, how do they understand it?
How do they understand it? And it was part of what I asked them to define it. Who do you think can step into this role? And why do you use this term versus this term? So that was part of what I was asking them.
I have a question for you. You don't have to give me any details, but just maybe give me kind of an idea. Because for my own master's thesis, I also had to kind of look into shamanism because it was also kind of this catch-all term that certain people were using that we can talk about anything and just put this label on top of it. But what are we really talking about here? What is really going on here with the shamanistic practices? So I'm curious to know if your participants have ever made any distinction between these 2 things. Actually, it could be 3, but the first one is when the practitioner experiences altered state of consciousness. So they go into like a trance, I guess you could say, quote unquote trance. And then according to Eliade, as you mentioned earlier, he calls this soul loss because the practitioner, he says, quotes, ascends to the heavens on trips. And in these journeys that the practitioner takes, we'll just use, for the sake of argument, we'll just use the word shaman here.
Right.
The shaman then tries to persuade or fight with the gods in order to get the benefits that he wants for, or she wants for, the people that he or she is trying to help back on Earth. And so there's an actual spirit journey, I guess you could say, happening. And in this case, they use the term soul, but soul and spirit could be kind of synonymous here. So there's this spirit that kind of leaves the body, maybe to a certain degree, or there could be like a very complex happening going on here, but something like that is happening. Right. So there is some kind of travel going on between 2 realms or different levels of existence, being, however you want to put it. The other state is called basically spirit possession. Is that the quote-unquote shaman goes into the trance and then at a certain point experiences basically an invasion of some other entity into their body. And so those were like the 2 main things that I was like, what is it we're talking about here with these shamans? So these are kind of like the 2 main things that were set out, kind of mapped out. And then the third option was kind of like a mix of the 2, the first 2. Right. So I was curious to know if your participants, if they talked about experiences like this, one or the other or both.
Interestingly, that wasn't a primary question that I asked them.
Okay, right.
But I did get some information about that just through, and if you want to know specifically, we can get to that, like what my primary intention was. So I never asked them about their altered states or their trans states, but they did. And it was what's interesting is there were definitely similarities between the 5. And so there were 4 women and 1 male that I interviewed. But there's definitely a lot of differences. And part of what really kind of separates what I would call traditional shamanism from like modern shamanism typically is this idea that they're only working with the benefic spirits.
Okay.
So, and this comes out of, and that's not to say that that's every single one or that they never come in contact with negative spirits. But when you ask them, or however you want, malevolent or whatever term you want to use for that. But when I did go more specifically into the spirits that they interacted with or what their relationships. So I was more interested in their relational side of it. And definitely more of them talked about, well, I work with the beneficial ones. The negative ones are there. But, when I open a space, when I set everything up, I'm calling on the helping spirits to come in and assist me with the treatment that I'm doing. So it's also very different typically in the sense that it's not this traditional shaman who's been picked various ways in the community and they become this community go-between. It's not that they're not still working in the community because they are working with people, but it's not this group where this whole group is coming together or they're in a village. It's, this person typically has like a business set up, which is an interesting aspect to it, where someone is coming to them and seeking their help, but they are in some ways being paid for this. And it's an individual session. So it's a different parameter. It's not how it was in a village and a tribe. So there's definitely some differences. The male participant did say, oh, the negative ones are there. They're there and they can attach, but my beneficial ones, my protectors, protect me from that. And part of my journey is sometimes I have to face, like he was talking about, like if I have an addiction, I smoke cigarettes, I drink a lot of caffeine. Like if I do those types of things and I feel like there's harm to it, he kind of related that to as that's my own kind of negative spirit that has attached to me. And now I'm working through that.
Okay. So it's not only just healing modalities for other people, but also for themselves.
Primarily, they start with themselves. And this is a really interesting, which I think existed in the traditional as well, because there's this idea of the initiation. And this is really what my focus was, because I was very interested in our modern practitioners experiencing some type of initiation. And so that's what I delved into. Like, how is that showing up in a modern context? Because you hear about, oh, they almost die, or they like all these various things happen. They go out on a vision quest and they have to experience these harsh experiences and then they get ripped apart, or they almost die, or they do die and the spirits bring them back. So these are the stories that you've heard when you, delve into what anthropologists or ethnographers are reporting about that. So, that was my question. Is there some type of initiation going on for them? And like, how did they experience that? So I think it was happening traditionally, but that's really when you kind of combined that the New Age movement and also First Nation or the United States indigenous community has had a huge impact on modern shamanism, that there is this idea that they must heal themselves first. And they all said that. All 5 of them said that in some way or another, that I had to clean myself up first. Like that was, or I got into it because of my own anxiety or my own physical issue or my own, this is what led me to this path. And I fixed me, and I'm not completely fixed. It's like a lifelong journey, but I have worked through my stuff enough that I can now offer that same assistance to other people. And even Iliada said that in the reports that he was looking at, that the initiation is the cure. So actually, whatever it was that they were going through, the death or the almost death, and then coming back to wholeness was what then enabled them to be the practitioner for the village. And I think that there's a similar thing. I can't say that 100%, but from what I've read, and definitely from the 5 participants that I talked to, all had various things that led them to pursue this. And it was so they definitely talked about being on the path, that it's a hard path, that it's not always easy, but that what they get from it, they could never go back to doing it a different way.
Okay. Yeah. And didn't you also have a question of whether or not people that would, let's just say for the sake of argument, we'll just use the word shaman, these practitioners that are using these techniques and doing these rituals, that they're always ill, or that they always have some type of physical ailment, or because there is kind of like this idea of the wounded healer that you mentioned in your thesis. So I think that was also one of your first questions is like, is this always the case? Is there always some kind of ailment or illness? I mean, have you
Right.
found that in your research? Have you found an answer to that question?
Again, with these 5, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know if everybody's asking that question, which I think it was such a small number, but that's all I could do at the master's level. But when I worked with the 2 people in the United States, so again, one was what he referred to himself as a medicine man, but actually grew up on a reservation and was considered that role in his community. And the other one had apprenticed under a Southwest tribe, under the women healers, and she herself became one apprenticing lived with the tribe herself. They indicated that there's always something from their experience. And having talked to them and interacted with them, that also influenced that question for me. And having my own journey of, I'm not a shaman, that's not what I'm doing, but what does going through something like that do to you, physically, mentally, psychologically, emotionally? And then what journey do you go on because of that? Because I feel like I'm on my own journey that was definitely influenced by having spent a year in bed. So that was what brought that question for me. I would say that 4 of them, let me find 3 for sure, that was physical, but they also talked about psychological as well. So it wasn't just physical. So it was a combination. It was definitely a combination, but one of them, it was over grief and it was over like contemplating suicide. And they had an experience which was what I would term like an extrasensory experience where they were about to drive off the road and the radio did something, like it was really loud and then it went really quiet without her touching it. And that caused her to take her foot off the gas and she just missed a truck like running into her. So she felt like this was just a pivotal moment for her that changed her life because she felt like something bigger than her like intervened in this. So hers wasn't necessarily physical, but she just felt like someone important to her had passed. And this grief that she experienced was so intense that she was contemplating like ending her own existence. So, and Iliada refers to that as well. He says it's not just physical, it can be psychological as well. And they talk about the psychosis. It can be a psychosis also. So yeah, but they all 5 had something or a combination of things.
Interesting. It does seem like in the stories that you read, whether or not they are just like legends or folklore or personal experiences of people, that there does seem to be this aspect of suffering that the healer then, after their transformation, there is like, as you said, like an initiation. They have to go through this very painful process to be able to then achieve this state of being a healer. And maybe it has also something to do with empathy. I mean, I'm just riffing here. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But if someone has never suffered in whatever way, physically or mentally or emotionally, then I wonder to myself, how would their skills be as a healer if they don't really know what it is like to suffer? It's always the question that came to my mind anyway, like, oh yeah, these people have to know what that feels like.
Absolutely.
In order to empathize with the person who's coming to them for, asking for help. So yeah, interesting stuff. That this concept seems to be very important in the stories of these people. So, okay. So we got shamanism. Now let's move to animism, because that's also that's not, I don't think, as sticky as shamanism, but you're using it in a particular way in conjunction with the modern shamanistic practices.
Absolutely. And I definitely can't say that I know 100% that everyone that would say that they're on this path would have views or thoughts that are animistic. But I think that like animism isn't only associated with shamanism. There's much more. But I would say that a really high percentage of people that are working along the shamanistic line would have some level of an animistic belief system. And there's definitely an older historical version of that, which came from E.V. Tyler. And there's some critiques about that as well, of course, because he used primitive. That was his, and his main idea about it was that animism was the start that then turned into religion, and then that we were heading to science, and that all of it was going to disappear. So, now we look at where we are, and that's not what happened. So it has progressed from that. Religion has not disappeared because of science, but it does have a new context. So definitely, obviously, the primitive part of it, and that it's not modern, has gone away. And there's lots and lots of scholars looking at this now, and it's really important at our time, especially with climate change. Yeah. This takes a really big active role in, I think, this emerging again and becoming so important and popular and interesting to scholars and even in pop culture because of what we're facing in our world. So I relied on, like, the people that I read and I looked at, definitely one is Bron Taylor, and he wrote a book called Dark Green Religion. And anyone that's talking about these themes really do refer to him that I've seen. Like, I just saw Kuku van Stukrad at a conference, and he was talking about this theme and definitely talked about Bron Taylor's work and the importance of it because of not just academics, not just practitioners, but politicians, artists. I mean, like, this idea of what's happening to our earth and what's happening to nature, is spreading through every reach of the world. Right. So back to what I did was definitely looked at what he was saying about it. And there's some other people as well. Graham Harvey is another person, and Ben Saylor also. So these are kind of the prominent people that are talking about it. There's many, 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 many more, but those are the ones that I looked at when I was doing this. And so there's a couple of different ways of looking at it or expanding on it. And so when Taylor was talking about it, now that they are calling it new animism, is one of the terms. And it's like reflecting this perception of a spiritual intelligence. So what E.B. Tyler said is, these primitive, quote, primitive people are thinking that the trees and the rocks have spirits in them. And how it's progressed is that there's like a spiritual intelligence is how they're describing it, or a life force, or there's animated natural entities and living things. And it can evolve into an actual communication. So this is where, like, the shamanism part comes in, where the practitioners are talking about having a relationship and interacting and talking to these entities in nature, and they're viewing them as they're helping, aiding spirits. So one of the practitioners said, although he had physical teachers, his primary teachers are the oak tree and the fire. And this is where he has learned the majority of how to do his sweat lodges, is from these entities. So when he is out in nature, this is who is teaching him. So there's like this different, it's not just, it's embodied with something. There's an intelligence, there's a relationship. And so that's how it's progressing or evolving. And the way that I really like, the way that Graham Harvey says, he says, animists are people who recognize that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human. So I thought that really, really liked that.
I like that.
Yeah. And that life is always lived in relationship to others. So animism is lived out in various ways that are all about learning to act respectfully, carefully, and constructively toward and among other persons. So that's how this animistic idea is progressing. And you see it it's not just shamanism. There's many, many, many nature religions in paganism and in witchcraft. I mean, like, there's I probably could not even list all the terms of the various practices that are happening that are involved with nature and with nature religion. So this is a really, really big topic. And part of what Stukrad was talking about, like why it's so important, is because this religious topic is actually changing ethical thought. It's going beyond just having a relationship with the entity or the being. And we're taking ourselves out of an anthropocentric system, and we're rallying communities. Like, this topic is so big that it is rallying and also making communities debate and fight. I mean, this is another huge area that we are just living in right now.
Definitely.
With the climate change. So it's Yeah. And so he said we're, instead of just protecting these resources, it's now about a fight for the earth, or fight for Gaia, or fight for what, people in the nature religions are viewing as an actual being with a consciousness. So this is where it's moving, moving beyond.
Definitely a different mindset than the classic, traditional, biblical mindset of having dominion over the earth and kind of, I don't know. I mean, I want to be careful about how I'm using this. I don't want to be too negative, but you could kind of, read into that about like exploitative practices, not being I know that there are many other stories in the Bible as well as being a shepherd and being, a caretaker, that as well. But it does seem like it doesn't seem like it is the fact in many instances with our modern world that big industry doesn't really take these ideas into consideration, and they are exploitative in the way that they treat their environments and how they behave in the environment. So, I think this is interesting development that we have here with ecology and religious or spiritual beliefs and practices. So, very interesting. I'm very keen to read Braun Taylor, actually. You mentioned that to me before. I was looking into, I'm going to get some of his books. But you would recommend Dark Green Religion?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I
Good.
would.
I will put that.
And just depending, part of what he does talk about in his book also, which I don't address in my research currently, is like the dark is the deep reverence, but it can also be like there can be a negative side to it. So that's also something about his research that he goes into, and that is where people say that nature or the beings are more important even than humans.
Oh, right. Okay.
And so there's this.
So they take it to the extreme.
They take it to the extreme, which at any point anybody can. So depending on what you read of his, he does have, I think, even a whole book about that. So he definitely goes into that aspect of it, saying that there can be this other side to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he addresses that as well in his work. One thing to say about what you were saying, which I did take, I had a seminar at Erfurt that was all about dark green religion. And part of what we looked at was what the big 5 or 8 religions, how they're responding to this. So that's just an interesting, if people are interested in that there are, like the Catholic Church has come out with a statement, and the Christian, the various religions are taking a stance on their position about nature.
Interesting.
And that it's just, I found that fascinating.
Do you have a list of like literature that you could send me for that?
I could.
Because I'd love to just put that in the program notes as well for people who might, be curious to know more about what is changing now with all of this and the different opinions that are now coming forth as a response to all of the changes that are happening in the world. So,
how does a religion that said we have dominion over everything now approach this really hot, debated topic? Exactly. And that is happening.
Great. Well, I would be keen to have that list of books. Great. Okay. So now getting more into your thesis itself, what questions were you asking in your research? What was I know you can't ask all of the questions. You have to limit your questions, of course. Your scope can't be too broad. But what were you asking? What did you want to find out?
Well, I narrowed it down to one main question, and then I had a couple adjacent questions. And so my primary question was there, and I changed initiation to traumatic experience or turning point. So was there a significant or traumatic life event that could be traced or tracked or reported on in these current practitioners? So that was my primary question. And then my adjacent questions is, what role did gender play, or does it play in any of the results of the study or in their experience? So just having just a gender awareness was interesting to me and important to me, especially in history in general, where women were often just not part of what was being studied or researched. And even Iliada had, where he didn't bring that in until it became a hot topic. And then he started bringing in awareness about, are there women shamans out there? So that was definitely something I wanted to look at as well. And then just, how do these religious actors construct or narrate their self-identity? So I was just really interested in how they formed either their agency or their identity through becoming these shamanic practitioners or technique practitioners.
Right. So what methods were you using to get to these answers to all these questions? How were you going about it?
I started with biographical narrative interview. And in that, I had a second part where there was a semi-structured interview. So I began really just saying, what is most important in your life story that led you on this path of this shamanic journey? And I just left it open.
Yeah.
And I just let them talk until they were done. And, some talked for 90 minutes and some talked for 20. And then there was further conversation. So I really did, even though I left that open to them, I chose what would be called like a relational interview position. And it was really important to me that it wasn't just that I was observing. So I did let them know my history. And I feel like part of what I was using is a semi-insider, even though I'm not a shaman myself. I had studied with shamans. I had taken some courses. And so they knew that coming into the interviews that there was like a sympathetic view that I had towards them. And so I did have conversation with them, but I did really want that first question for them to just talk it out so that they could tell me what was most important to them. Then I had like 7 questions that were in a semi-structured that I then asked. And I didn't know at that time what my focus would be for the thesis. So I came up with these 7 areas that I thought would be interesting. And I asked them that. And then just, follow-up questions, especially like one of the things that was a challenge is that I was in Germany and I was speaking English. So I spoke with people that I know German, but not enough to conduct a full interview in it. And they could answer in German because I said I can understand better than I can speak. So there was like this language barrier. So there was a lot of where I was just really clarifying and just being ensure that I understood what they said. And I offered them the ability to read the transcripts and just to, be able to make sure that I was representing their voice in the best way that I could. So I did that. And then later I sent a biographical survey and not all of them participated in that part, but I was just trying to get a little bit more information after I had done all the coding. So then I transcribed, I coded, and then I did the analysis process through that.
That is because I did very, very similar type of work with my research participants. And I found the coding process to be very interesting because, as you said, you don't really know what you're going to get. So you don't really know what it is you're going to write about until you start to analyze everything that you receive, all these narratives and the answers to the questions that you're asking. And when you go into the coding, even though that's a very long process, tedious process, but it's I think the most interesting because you start to then really see, okay, we have some themes building here and we have things that are, we have these terms that are being used all the time by all the people. And so all these little nuggets start to form and come out of all of this, your mountains of text.
Of data, right? And I only had 5. I mean, when people have 100, wow. That's why it takes so long. Yeah, I actually, one of my biggest chapters was about nature, and nature was not one of my original questions. So this is really what came out of the process of the coding. And I don't know what you chose to do, but I hand coded. So I did all of it. And I know that I'm a visceral person. I'm that type of person that really does much better when I'm holding something and writing and underlining and highlighting. And so I'm, total old school in that sense. But I felt like every time I just got so much more from it. And I feel like I just really was able to just take in, absorb, and just was saturated with it every time, and I read it about 3 or 4 times. I went through and just, so that was quite a process, but really stuff came out of there. And a really interesting thing that came out that I had no idea about was like how they found shamanism, each of them, how they found this path. There was a similarity there, and all of them reporting about how they did not fit in when they were growing up. So that this was just another really interesting part, because one question that came as I was coding and stuff was why the shamanic path instead of like paganism or witchcraft or, like what, and I don't have enough data to answer that question, but they did all have very, very specific experiences as children where they were talking to birds and having these, extrasensory experiences as children. And that was something that I wasn't necessarily expecting or didn't even think to ask about. And that definitely emerged from all of them.
That's
there
great.
was,
Great stuff. I think that's one of the most interesting parts of qualitative research, that, we're not just working with numbers, and that, of course, quantitative has its value in certain areas, but qualitative with the narrative and the ethnographic. And I think those are such fantastic, wonderful, creative outlets for, you get so many rich, you get the rich descriptions, of course.
Absolutely.
Is the kind of the words that you keep hearing over and over again. You want that thick, rich description so that you can get these little nuggets of the themes that are developing and the little gems that come out of all of those stories. That's great. I'm glad that you have that same experience, because I thought that was the best. I mean, it's the longest part, but the best part. How long did you work with your participants? How long did you conduct your interviews with them?
I didn't do extensive. There wasn't a lot of time, I felt, at the master level. It took me actually even a year to get the first initial interviews done. So I really only did, like with one, I did 2 interviews, and with all the others, I just did 1 interview. And then I did some follow-up in this survey that I did. And even with that, I only picked, of the 7 categories, I picked 3. And then the 4th was the nature. And I mean, I just barely touched the information that I got from just that hour and a half. But again, I do feel like I got a lot. It just was so amazing. I felt so honored. And, I'm still analyzing how much that they knew. And one even said, well, because I knew you weren't critical, I just felt the ability to just really like tell you stuff. And so they all commented about their own experience of feeling like they'd never really talked to anybody. No one had ever really asked them, to know about this, and that them being people that think that they always are working on themselves found it to be very beneficial to actually have this opportunity to really say it out loud, what it was that they were doing on their path. So even though I didn't spend a lot of time with them, I felt like I just got to know them so intimately, so very quickly. I just felt really, really honored, because they really immediately just went in and were telling me about like this near death experience and, these just, and I do have a psychology background. I didn't really talk about that, but I worked in behavioral health for 6 years. And so I don't know if that helped as well, that I created a space for them where they felt like they had an empathetic ear that was just really interested. But I just felt like they just immediately got like right down to it and just told me amazing stuff in that short amount of time. So I felt really lucky.